Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Farmers for Free Trade Roundtable. I'm Darcy Vetter, consultant at Edelman Global Advisory and Sower Strategies, and I'm very pleased to be able to join you this morning. Have spent really almost 20 years working in trade and in ag trade in particular, and I'm just pleased to see that we have gathered really a variety of expertise across the ag supply chain this morning for an important discussion about how the benefits of trade really flow through that agricultural supply chain and the impact that that has on producers and workers throughout it. I think when we talk primarily about ag trade, we often go straight to looking at production data, farmer income, and the value of exports. We often talk about 20% of farm revenue that relies on exports. What we forget to do sometimes is to elevate the discussion of what happens between the farm and the port, or between the farm and the eventual users of the products that we do export. We forget about sometimes the processors, the truckers, the retailers, the shippers, who take our products and get them to end users in that valuable form, a form that they've come to, in many cases, rely on. We can't serve our customers without them, and they represent more than 1 million jobs in the United States in that supply chain. And we sometimes forget to talk about the multiplier effect that each of those employees has in their communities when they spend the wages that they get from participating in that agricultural supply chain. And I'm a Nebraska farm girl, and when I was preparing for this panel, I was just thinking a little bit about my own community and what my life was like back in Aurora, Nebraska. And I was thinking about my group of friends in high school. And I realized that among the group, there was me, whose father was both a farmer and a food processor, another who had a farmer in their family, a trucker, the manager of a co-op, and an ag supply person among their parents. And so really that supply chain was often in my living room in terms of the people who were supported by it. And I don't think my experience is very dissimilar from what a lot of people experience in rural America and frankly in communities across the country. But if you asked the parents of any of my high school friends whether they would consider themselves a participant in agricultural trade, most of them would probably say no, because we don't often think consciously about the connections in that supply chain. And so I hope today that we can bring a little bit of that connecting the dots to our discussion by talking to our excellent set of panelists. And today you're going to hear from AV Roth, a pork producer from Wisconsin, Doug Chapin, a dairy producer from Michigan, Fernando Soberanos, who's both a produce exporter and importer from California, Deb Gangwish, a corn grower from Nebraska, Bart Peper, who's an ethanol producer in Illinois, Manuel Almira, the executive director of the Port of Palm Beach, and last but not least, from Dr. Joe Glauber, who many of you know is a leading agricultural economist and served as the chief economist from USDA and a trade negotiator himself, to help us put this all a little bit in the larger economic context at the end. Before we get started, though, just a few housekeeping items. First and foremost, I really want to thank the Farmers for Free Trade for hosting the town hall today. For those of you who don't know, Farmers for Free Trade is a nonprofit. It represents food and agriculture and supports trade that supports farmers. You might recall that in the days before COVID, when we were moving around a lot more freely, Farmers for Free Trade drove an RV all over the US, 30 states, 40,000 miles in support of the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And they've been working hard to raise the importance of trade for the food and ag sector, and they're doing that today. While physically we aren't covering 40,000 miles, I think if you look at where our panelists are from today, we've got a lot of that covered in our geographic reach this morning. Second, I want you to be aware that we are recording today's session, and the recording will be available to everyone later today. And I really hope that today's town hall can be a conversation. We have a lot of panelists, a lot of people to hear from up front, but we are going to reserve a significant amount of time for Q&A. So feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to insert questions as you think of them. And when we get to the Q&A at the end, Brian Keel, the Executive Director of Farmers for Free Trade, will be helping us make sure we can answer as many of those as possible. When you put a question in the Q&A box, please note your name and your affiliation. I know we have a number of members of the press on the call today. We want to make sure to do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible. So please let us know your outlet or affiliation when you draft your question. With that, I think we will go ahead and move to our first panelist. I would ask each of the panelists to do a brief introduction of yourself, and then each is going to present for just a few minutes, talking about their operations and of course that importance of trade. And AV Roth, we're going to start with you, so please go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Darcy, for the introduction, and good morning to everybody listening in. As Darcy said, my name is Howard AV Roth. I'm a hog farmer out of Wauzeka, Wisconsin, as well as immediate past president and current chair of the Trade Committee for the National Pork Producer Council. I'm a fifth-generation farmer who owns and operates Roth Feeder Pig, Inc., which includes 3,000 sows in a farrow-to-lean farm, marketing over 75,000 head annually, and I'm happy to be here today representing my industry. International trade and our success in foreign markets is undoubtedly one of the greatest successes of the U.S. hog industry, with roughly 1/4 of American pork being sold abroad. It's safe to say that these export markets play a major role in impacting the size of our industry. 1/3 of the average value of a hog can be directly tied to exports. And in 2020, we exported over $7.9 billion of pork and pork products to over 100 countries. The size of our industry has been growing. 60,000 hog farms currently support around 500,000 jobs up and down the supply chain, including feed providers, farm operations, packers, retailers, financial service, port workers, and many others. Of these 500,000 US jobs, over 100,000 of them are directly tied to pork exports. These jobs are widely diverse and high paying. Right now, wages across all sectors of the US economy are rising rapidly to be competitive. However, that trend started even before COVID in our industry. In states like my own, or in the industry's largest state, Iowa, the average wage is over double the minimum wage and comes with highly competitive benefits to attract and maintain talent. In a state like mine, a wage just shy of $15 an hour is no significant sum. Wages and benefits are only part of the equation. Most farmers promote entirely from internal employees. As operations continue to grow with expanded export markets, hog operations value those who know the business and can train others. Consequently, hog farmers offer security and satisfaction in a career in agriculture. Since before the pandemic, and despite other risks such as animal disease or market volatility, our industry has served as a major employer in the rural America, growing rapidly and constantly hiring for well-paid work. While our industry has not been immune to issues that come from workforce shortages, we are glad to be able to count on the continued growth in our real employment, facilitated in part by international trade. Therefore, it is imperative that the administration focus on expanding markets for US agriculture and pork around the world. The biggest export opportunity for our industry lies in Southeast Asia. Earlier this year, and after years of work, the Philippines government unilaterally lowered their tariffs on pork to combat food price inflation. Since then, US pork exports have increased by over 150% in the first 7 months of the year. These markets across access victories are wonderful for the industry and US workers. But we also should focus on comprehensive market access packages like those offered in trade agreements, like the CPTPP, which our competitors are part of. We encourage the administration to enter into broader market access negotiations. We also want to thank the administration for the work and help they did in the ports, and we're hoping that will help clear up some of our backlog pork. And again, thank you everybody for your time, and I'm greatly appreciative of it.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks, AV. Greatly appreciated, and lots for us to think about there. Next, I want to turn to Doug Chapin.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. I am Doug Chapin, and I manage Chapin Family Farms, LLC in Remus, Michigan, along with my wife, Sherry, and our son, Sam. Our farm milks 675 Holsteins and directly employs 14 local workers, in addition to the work that my family and I do on the farm. I am also the producer chairman of Michigan Milk Producers Association, a farmer-owned cooperative serving over 1,000 dairy farmers in the Great Lakes region. MMPA operates a cheese plant in Indiana and 2 dairy ingredient plants in Michigan. We employ over 290 workers at our facilities. Exports have been critical to helping support my farm and the rest of our member producers that supply milk to our cooperative. Last year, the United States exported more than 1 out of every 6 gallons of milk. In dollar terms, that meant $6.5 billion worth of dairy production was sold overseas that went to the bottom line of dairy producers like me. Exporting dairy products is the success story of American trade policy. Our family dairy operation has been in existence for over a century, so we've seen the positive impact of exports as US sales around the world have grown in recent years. A big reason why is US leadership from both Republicans and Democrats alike on market access and a continued push for free trade agreements with willing countries that have become important export markets. Free trade agreements have delivered the equivalent of $17 billion for dairy farmers in recent years, in addition to generating benefits throughout the US dairy supply chain. This includes workers on the farm, at the processing plants, and at various points along the transportation process, including longshoremen, truck drivers, railroad workers, and many others. But aside from the USMCA update to NAFTA, the last genuinely new free trade agreement we had enacted took effect nearly a decade ago, with negotiations that happened much earlier. We seem to be either evaluating or at times negotiating deals, but not implementing new comprehensive trade agreements that eliminate tariffs on our exports. Just as I have continued in the family business, I would love to have the opportunity to pass the operation along to my children. However, for continued growth and prosperity, and for future generations to continue milking, we need new markets that come with new trade agreements. Dairy farmers want the Biden trade policy strategy to include following through with agreements that had already started negotiations, such as with the United Kingdom, a big dairy importing market. And dairy farmers also hope the administration will seek Trade Promotion Authority to go after new trade agreements, as well as looking at other opportunities to directly negotiate lower tariffs and open more markets in key countries around the world. This is critical to realizing fully the potential of dairy markets in places like Vietnam, Indonesia, and other major dairy purchases. I thank you for this opportunity to participate today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug, and for that description really of the dairy supply chain and the importance of trade there. I'd like to turn next to Fernando to talk a bit about his role in that agricultural supply chain.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Darcy. Thank you, everybody, for having me in this town hall. I'm Fernando Soberanes. I'm originally from Mexicali, Baja California, Mexico. Saying hi to everybody today from our Giumarra Long Beach office. I've had the pleasure of working at Giumarra since 2010. Giumarra represents a workforce that's nearly 4,000 people strong and considered one of the largest grape growers in the U.S. In these 11 years, I've had the opportunity of experiencing multiple different game changers and learned that every single season has its unique challenges. Those challenges can range from an earthquake in Chile to the introduction of new grape varieties, the rise of new growing areas such as Peru, multiple different drought seasons, rainy seasons, and most recently, a global pandemic. Every single season is unique. Our goal at Giumarra is to be able to sell our commodities year-round. That includes our domestic and imported crops. It is in our best interest to have our commodities available year-round in order for consumption to remain steady year-round. Retailers want fresh produce in stock 365 days a year, and we don't want the public to get used to not having our products available. This is a good thing because it helps create and maintain jobs across our supply chain, from the activity at our farms and facilities, the ports where we import and export, our transportation and storage providers, quality control, sales staff, and a wide array of services that work within our supply chain. With all the changes, one thing remains constant, and that's that every year cost continues to rise, reducing the potential profit margins for American growers. It is because of the shrink in margin that our growers are constantly looking for the best markets to sell their products into. Take grapes, for example. California has consistently maintained an export rate of 35%, including the two largest export markets in Canada and Mexico. In the past 2 to 3 years, tariffs and foreign policies have made U.S. growers focus on selling their products domestically, which created an oversupply feeling in the grape marketplace. If our export market declines, it will add more volume to our domestic supply, resulting in weaker domestic pricing. Limiting our commercial options in the marketplace is not a good strategy for the industry. South American growers have been able to get higher prices for their products by becoming better global suppliers instead of focusing on the US as their main market. I find myself constantly having to fight with Korea, Japan, China, and European markets in order to get the best fruit available for our US retailers. We now live in a global marketplace where fruits and vegetables are part of the world supply chain, a supply chain where imports and exports are joined at the hip. Any disruption to our import business will likely damage our exports, which in turn will probably negatively impact the entire industry, not just the farmers who are exporting their products. In summary, we need to become better global suppliers to ensure that our supply chain continues to supply fresh fruit and keep our people working at the farm, working to farm, to ship, to import, export, wholesale, and retail fresh produce throughout the US and our different export markets. It is my belief that by becoming better global suppliers, our domestic industry will benefit from better prices and more jobs. Thank you all for letting me participate in today's town hall.
Thank you so much, Fernando. And I think an important point about the fact that while the US is a major exporter of ag products, we're also key importers, and the relationship on how we meet consumer expectations and drive demand in the US and globally. That was important point to make there. After Fernando, I'd like to welcome Deb Gangwish from my home state of Nebraska to make a few remarks. Thanks, Deb.
Deb, you're muted.
I knew I would do that. Sorry. I said I set my timer, so I'm already 12 seconds in, so I better get this going. As Darcy said, I'm Deb Gangwish from Nebraska. Alongside my husband, Paul, my son, Trace, my son-in-law, Dalton, and a team of about 22 full-time employees and 10 part-time employees, we farm, ranch, and truck in central and north central Nebraska. We're primarily corn, soybeans, sorghum. We have a cow-calf operation in the beautiful sandhills of Nebraska, as well as a backgrounding lot. And then our trucking company, unfortunately, we do a lot of hauling for John Deere. And if you heard the news this morning, we may not be hauling much for John Deere. So, but we do haul agricultural products nationwide. I also serve on our state Corn Growers Association here in Nebraska as a director. And I'm really pleased to have been reelected for a second term on the National Corn Growers Association. NCGA is an organization that's been around since 1957, and we represent 40,000 dues-paying members across the country, as well as the interest of our 300,000 corn farmers from across the country. Kind of want to hit some key points with trade, kind of overall high-level things that kind of came to mind. As I said, on our farm, we employ 22 full-time people, not including my husband and I, and 10 to 15 part-time people. And I'm always really proud of that as a family farm, because that's an economic driver for rural America. And we have retirement plans, we have health insurance. And because we have opportunities with trade, we can give these things to our employees and can create a better quality of life. So I feel a family farm can include employees, and it's really powerful to have those folks be part of what my son calls our farmly. So it's interesting to note that in 2018, there was an economic analysis run by IHS Markit that talked about jobs. And they mentioned for every one job directly involved in the export of grain and grain products, we have an additional 3.2 jobs that are indirectly supported elsewhere in the US economy. That's powerful. And we see that on our farm and in rural America. It can keep us vibrant. More than 20% of our domestic corn crop is exported annually when we account for corn and the value-added products such as ethanol and distillers dried grains with solubles, or DDGs. For growers like me in Nebraska and across the US, trade is responsible for 33% of a corn farmer's income. That's a lot. A few years ago, my husband and I had an incredible opportunity with Governor Ricketts to do a trade mission in China, Hong Kong, and Macau. And I had an awakening. We both did when we were over there. We were in Disney, Hong Kong, and we were touring the kitchens. And they took us to one of the kitchens that had a box of beef. And it was from Nebraska. It was from the Grand Island Processing Facility. And Paul and I both just looked at each other and were like, that's our product in Hong Kong. And it was at that moment that we realized the family farm, our family farm, is a global business. And we had never really thought about our farm that way. And I think a couple other people mentioned that. So that was one of those moments where I just fell in love with trade and the opportunities that it gave to America's farmers. America's corn farmers have benefited greatly the past few, well, since phase one of the China phase one deal came into play. And we see that as a really positive step to our overall goal of long-term market access and a more fair trading relationship. I caught a little headline from Drovers, and I think I saw imports were up over 160% for beef products. So that's what trade can do. We're a little bit disappointed in our ethanol and DDG products, which currently face hefty tariffs when entering that Chinese market. So that's a little source of a frustration for us. But we feel that opportunities for new agreements should be sought after in areas experience the rapid population growth, as a lot of people mentioned. Southeast Asia, India, Africa. I know with U.S. Grains Council, our Manny talks about we need to be there, and I wholeheartedly support that. We hope, as a lot of other people have said, that we will return to the CPTPP. Don't say that one fast. The opportunity for us is phenomenal there. And as we've all heard, China is attempting to re-enter that. And from the time we were left out of that, I have always pushed with our folks on the Hill, please consider bringing us back in. And I hope the administration will consider that as well. We have to realize that with 60% of the world's population living within that Asia Pacific region, we're absolutely crazy to ignore these consumers. And that was another insight when we were in Hong Kong. We are in this powerhouse of people, and to have them love our products and want our products, there's such opportunity there. A little bit different note, I just want to touch on Mexico real quickly. For Nebraska and the US corn farmer, Mexico is one of our most reliable international marketplaces, and we typically have $3 to $4 billion per year in valued products that go there. Like many at this roundtable, I think we were all just ecstatic to get USMC across the line, but we really look to the administration to to make sure our trading partners are accountable, to hold folks accountable. We negotiated a fantastic deal with USMCA, but accountability is key. I guess in conclusion, I just want to mention that I'm just one of many, many, many farmers that have a story to tell. We're just a small collection of people from around the country that have a story to tell, how, as far as trade impacting their family farm. We have to remember that we're only 5% of the population, and that number is dwindling. 95% of the world's population is outside our country. And it's key for us and US farmers, ranchers of all kinds to have trade opportunities. And like I mentioned, family farms are a global business, and thanks to a trade mission, that stays front and center for me. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to listening to the rest of the presenters.
Thank you so much, Deb, for really, again, connecting those dots for us on how your farm really is supplying consumers around the world, and how true that is for so many producers in the United States of a variety of different crops, as well as the corn, the beef, the products that you produce too. I think it's important to remember. And along those lines, our next speaker is Bart Peper, who can talk a little bit about the importance of trade in markets for value-added ag products, including some we might not think of, like ethanol, that are not necessarily on the food and beverage sector. So over to you, Bart.
Yeah, I'm Bart Peper. I'm the VP of Global Strategy for the Marquis companies. I've been with Marquis about 10 years. German-born Dutch citizen that lives over here. I've lost the accent, so I've been over here for a while. And I'll echo several of the things that Deb mentioned from a corn and ethanol perspective. But us as Marquis have grown our business to over 4 times the size that we were in about 2008. We employ over 400 people now. We export over 1.5 million tons of products and reach about 30 countries on 6 continents. And so exports are becoming more and more important to how we operate our business. And as we've grown that business, we've really been able to also grow our supply chains in terms of, the number of trucks, the number of rail cars, barges, ports, and terminals we operate within. And so we now work on kind of the downstream with ocean vessels as well. But really what it boils down to is that the ethanol industry has continued to grow at rapid paces. And in 2020, the ethanol industry directly was responsible for about 62,000 jobs in the United States, and indirectly represented about 242,000 jobs across all sectors of the economy. And so really what we're trying to promote is that there are several barriers being put up to kind of penalize what we think is the efficiency of the American agricultural system. And so even though the United States exported about 1.3 billion gallons of ethanol in 2020 and more than 11 million tons of DDG, what's really interesting is that we face continuous barriers both in Asia and in Europe and to Mexico from different products or different sectors. So we've been negotiating with China for a long time to try and get DDG back into that market. It's still heavily protected. Brazil does the same thing for ethanol products, putting a 20% tariff on any product coming in there. And so we're just really interested in continuing to see trade barriers dropped that allow the processing and exporting of all these corn-based products, and really promoting U.S. agriculture abroad. So thank you for your time today, and we're very interested in promoting more exports.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bart. I think you raise a good, a really good point that a lot of the times when we talk about market access and trade, we focus on tariffs, and some of the barriers that we face go well beyond tariffs into standards and other things. And I think that's actually a really good segue to our next speaker, Manuel Almira. And if you can't open the newspaper right now without looking at the importance of our ports and shipping and logistics, to the ability for U.S. producers to trade, and how much the people that work at our ports and the people who work in those logistics are really critical to the whole agricultural economy. And so with that in mind, I will turn it over to you, Manny. I think you're still muted, Manny.
Am I on? You can hear me? Great. Okay. Well, thank you again. Good morning from South Florida. I am Manuel Almira, Manny, the Executive Director of the Port of Palm Beach. For those of you who do not know where the port is located, we're about 75 miles north of Miami. My first job out of college, I was working at a steamship line called United States Lines. I was selling space on a shipping container ship. And that's all I've done in my whole life, is being involved in the shipping industry. You know, seaports are very similar to airports. They have the proper facility so that when a ship arrives, the tenants and shipping companies can conduct their business in the most efficient, profitable way. Port authorities do not own ships, and they cannot tell the vessel where to go. What can they carry? Market forces determine that. What ports can help is to facilitate trade, working with food exporters to get states and federal grants to build new cold storage warehouses, and working with importers to get winter melons imports stored in foreign trade zones with the accompanying tax deferment. In the United States, the top 5 U.S. agriculture exports are soybean, corn, tree nuts, pork, and beef products. You probably know the numbers. I'm not going to bore you with that because they're quite large and very significant. The U.S. seaport industry supports over 31 million American jobs. That includes mine. At the Port of Palm Beach, with only 165 acres of available acreage, made us a container port, one of the smallest container ports in the country. Yet, due to operational efficiencies, we are the 18th busiest container port in the United States. Among 15 billion in goods that are moved through the port each year, 2 billion worth of food goes to the islands in the Caribbean. Our port and the tenants are responsible for over 3,000 direct jobs and another 6,000 indirect jobs. Additionally, over 700,000 tons of raw sugar are shipped through the port into the northern states each year. Over 80% of container volume is exported here at the port, and most of the imports containers are empty. We are already doing our part to improve the balance of trade in the country. From our locations, ships can reach countries in the Caribbean basins in hours, not days. This is very convenient because most of the Caribbean islands today depend on Florida for their goods and food distribution. Let me tell you why. As the Caribbean island continues to grow, less and less land is available for farming. Hence, they need the supply from outside of their own countries. This is why our location is so convenient, because shipments of much needed goods and supplies can reach the stores in less than a week. The demand for food supplies come from 2 types of consumption: local consumption and passengers on board cruise ships that demand to eat exact food they consume at home. So in summary, all U.S. seaports can be the connection point for either bulk shipments of grain or food shipped in containers of all sizes, dry or refrigerated food items. Ports are ready, willing and able to connect between the grower and the foreign distributor. Thank you again for allowing me to participate.
Thank you so much, Manny, for that explanation and reminder of the important role that ports play as a source of economic growth and jobs in the areas where you operate, but also in really facilitating trade and protecting the value of our agricultural imports and exports, and ensuring their quality, their consistency, et cetera, by the way you treat them at ports. It's incredibly important. Thank you for that. Last but not least, I have the pleasure of introducing Joe Glauber. And Joe is going to help tie together a bit what we've heard from our other panelists and think about that larger economic context. We've heard about different products, different regions, different roles from ports, from importers and exporters. And Joe will help put some of that in the larger economic context about what trade means overall to our ag supply chains. So Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Darcy. Yeah, I'm Joe Glauber. I'm currently with the International Food Policy Research Institute, a think tank in Washington, D.C., where I do work on food policy and trade. But as Darcy mentioned, I spent about 30 years at the Department of Agriculture, where I was chief economist for a while, and also worked as chief ag negotiator for USTR back in the mid-2000s. So I've been doing trade for a long, long time. I really want to thank Farmers for Free Trade. I think it's a great organization, and I think you see why. It's just a great set of panelists who I think have really given a good indication how trade has impacted their industries and how important it is for their industries, both in terms of selling product, but also in terms of the number of jobs it creates and other things. And I think, as Fernando had pointed out, and as Darcy echoed, not just exports, I mean, imports as well. I think the whole building of global value chains have been important for not just producers, but consumers as well. And I think these are important things to remember. So I have been involved with agriculture for a long time, and looking at the export picture, it's really staggering, the sort of growth or the importance of exports for so many industries. And I think in particular meats, if you look back in 1990, which for me doesn't seem that long ago, you know, chicken, we export about 6% of the poultry that we produced. We're now doing 16 to 17, 18%. Beef, it's gone. We were a big net importer of beef, you know, in the 80s, 90s, but that all started to change. As markets opened up in Asia in particular, where we went from exporting about 4% of the beef we produced, so now, you know, over 12%. And pork is just staggering. I mean, this was all mentioned in the previous speakers, but you know, you're talking going from less than 2% or 4% or so of the pork being exported to now, you know, over a quarter of the hogs produced or you know, of pork produced in this country is now exported. So these markets are really, really important. Dairy, same thing. Dairy was essentially an avenue to dump surplus product for our government programs. And now we're competitive in world markets. The powder market, the protein market in dairy products, the US is a major competitor. And I think that really shows where you see that there's now active interest with dairy industries, and we heard from Doug. And of course, the grains as well. And economic activity, you know, the Economic Research Service at USDA does annual survey or looking at these numbers. And so I'll just repeat them, but we know how important it is. For every dollar or so of exports, they tend to contribute another $1.17 of additional economic activity. And so if you're looking at basic multipliers of around 7,500 jobs associated with $1 billion of exports, you look at a year like this year where we're forecast to export a record $178 billion, or just shy of $178 billion of export. That's a lot of jobs, just using that multiplier at about 1.3 billion. And I think all you need to do is look at the last few years with trade wars. You can see how disruptive when that system isn't working. As markets closed off in China, you can see something like soybeans, where we were sending 1 out of every 4 rows of soybeans planted was being harvested and sent to China. All of a sudden, when those markets are shut off, they have to find new homes, and that causes a lot of disruption, not just for soybeans. You look at what had been shipped mainly out of the PNW, all of a sudden was finding a lot of its way out the Gulf. That means elevators, other operators along the value chain are impacted. And I think it's if not for trade aid, obviously a lot of those reduced revenues for farmers really would have had a very, very large toll. That unfortunately that didn't go for everyone, because there's all these other activities that were impacted, but not necessarily compensated. So I think to me, the biggest cost of these things, though, is and it was echoed in a couple of the earlier presentations, is the fact that while we're renegotiating trade agreements or dealing with the impact of trade wars, a lot of other countries around the world have been pursuing trade agreements. And so unfortunately, we may have decided to leave TPP, but the rest of those countries got an agreement. And so what we found ourselves is on our heels trying to, okay, well, what can we do with Japan? Because we need that market. And all of a sudden we have all these trading partners and now have better access to Japan than we had. So I think my hope is that we would get more involved with this stuff. I'll put a plug in for the WTO. I think things like trade rules are really, really important, and we need a functioning appellate body for that as well. Darcy, I think I'll turn back my time and go to question and answers.
Thank you very much for that, Joe, and thank you for mentioning, of course, the importance of the WTO. We saw Ambassador Catherine Tai making a big speech about the U.S. and engagement at the WTO just an hour before we started this morning. So certainly something to think about, and would tie that back again to the comments that we heard from Doug about the importance of U.S. leadership in really being active in those trade negotiations and working with our trading partners for the system. Certainly important overall for U.S. agriculture. So I want to start by saying, I don't think I've ever moderated a panel where everyone stayed on time. We have plenty of time for Q&A. We went through a lot of different comments, how different sectors and different products are important for that ag supply chain. And Joe, of course, provided some good context about the increasing importance of agricultural exports for the U.S. ag sector and production. So with that, we do have a good time for discussion. I would remind folks to go ahead and submit your questions in the Q&A box. Remember to indicate both your name and your affiliation. And we will head into that Q&A now. So Brian, over to you. I think you've had a chance, hopefully, to take a look at some of those questions and can share them.
I have, and thank you, Darcy, again for moderating this panel. What a great discussion. So our first question today is coming from Lance Youngmeyer with the Fresh Produce Association of the Americas. And Lance directs his question to Fernando with Giumarra, which is a member of Fresh Produce Association of the Americas, but I think it probably is a question you could direct to others as well. So Fresh Produce Association of the Americas every year gives out a Member of the Year award, normally reserved for company executives. But this year, their award is going to what they refer to as the essential worker. So everyone in the industry who does the day-to-day work from warehouses and logistics to accounting, sales, and more. As we think about disruptions from COVID and from supply chain disruptions and think about essential workers, Lance is wondering if Fernando in particular could talk about the contributions that he and his colleagues have made and the importance to their communities of the work they do. But again, I think it's probably a question broader than Fernando. But Darcy, why don't you start with that question?
That sounds great. We can start with Fernando there and work our way forward. So please, over to you.
Sure, happy to answer. I completely agree. This year more than ever, especially with the pandemic being what it is, even though we're working by the port in Long Beach, but we never stopped working. We always came into the office, kept making sure that our products were getting loaded, that the fruit was getting off the port and heading over to the DC so that the retailers, which had record years, kept their stocks or the fruit in stock. So I completely agree with the association focusing more on the essential worker, especially for a lot of us that we were concerned. We had concern of continuing to work in the environment. But luckily, we followed the guidelines that our management set in place, and we're able to come out and still here and looking for more. So I appreciate the question, and I do think this is a year to show our gratitude for all the people that continue to work day in and day out throughout this whole situation.
It's excellent. I think that, the last 18 months have, I think, shown a real spotlight for people on the role that workers play in getting those products from the field to dinner plates. And I think we live in a country where many of us don't think very hard about how the food gets to our table, and with disruptions to the supply chain from COVID, with inability of workers to be able to move or concerns about their safety. I think we have an opportunity to have a bigger discussion and to think about the importance of workers and how, essential they really are to both the quantity and the quality of the food that many of you produce each day. And so I think that's interesting and well-deserved recognition from FPAA there this year. Do we have another question, or are there any other panelists who want to talk a little bit about worker issues, worker supply, those things? Manny, do you want to weigh in?
I do. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Similar to Fernando, here at the Port of Palm Beach, with the exception of our cruise ship, we never skipped a beat. Everyone showed up to work on a skeleton basis, but none of the ships, other than the cruise ship, skipped the schedule. We did see somewhat of a market dip because what I mentioned before, the Caribbean basin, which consists of over 15 different countries, different islands, they rely heavily on the cruise passengers. And when the cruise passengers stopped coming, then we did feel that hit in the marketplace. We saw a decrease of about 7% in cargo going out there. And that mostly was, again, food that would be supplied for the restaurants and hotels to meet the demand from the cruise passengers. But luckily, we're getting back to normal. This past year, we broke even, and we have already seen significant increases in cargo. So, and again, cargo can be translated to food products. So we're pleased to be able to be in that position that we never skip a beat.
That's excellent. Thank you, Manny. And again, lots of people behind that decision not to skip a beat. They worked very hard while many of us were able to work from home, and that's greatly appreciated, right? Those who never really stopped going to the office or to the port every day. We appreciate that. Are there other, Brian, do you want to bring another question through? Or Deb, did you want to comment on the worker piece?
I do. I just have a couple comments from our perspective in Nebraska and maybe from the trucking industry side, and much like Manny, and I think I can speak for a lot of the folks across the country, a lot of us on the farms, again, there were things that were different, but we forged ahead, and for the most part, things went on like they would every other year. There were some shortages, supply issues, et cetera, but our team of women and men were phenomenal. What we're running into though, is the wage hikes that are going on around us, you know, with McDonald's, Walmart, you know, these, you know, wages are going up. And so we're reassessing that, not during harvest. We got to get the crop out first, but that's one of our things on the table to really look at. We pride ourselves on offering health insurance, retirement, a matching retirement plan, extreme flexibility. The women in our office, anyone who's capable has the flexibility to work from home when necessary. We really pride ourselves in treating our team like family as much as possible. And I don't know if that's going to be enough. For the first time that we've ever experienced, we're just not able to fill some positions, and they're in our trucking area. We just cannot get the folks. So again, I just want to kind of lay out what we're seeing in Nebraska and just some of the challenges, because I'm sure there's other people who are experiencing this. I know personally with some friends in the corn industry, there were some people who were unable to, you know, complete some duties with corn because of employee shortages. It's hitting us. It's hitting us in a lot of ways, but we need to be creative and like I said, forge ahead and figure out how we can get people to join our family. So anyway, I just wanted to lay that out there for you. I don't know what other folks are experiencing, but that's kind of where we're at on our farm in Nebraska.
It's very helpful, Deb. I think labor supply has been and continues to be a big issue for the ag sector. I know my family's operation is not far from you, Deb, and last talked to my dad a couple nights ago who could use about 23 employees for our ag processing line, and he has 11. And so lots of folks working overtime to try to get food to people's tables, but you know, also to make sure that workers are well cared for. So I think it's we sometimes forget that farmers are also entrepreneurs, right? And they are running these businesses that are quite sophisticated and have to both produce in the field, but then market the grain and work with their employees. And farmers, like other employers, are wearing a lot of hats and facing some of those challenges right now. Brian, over to you for another question.
Sure, and we have quite a number that have come in. So let's we'll click through as many of these as we can in the next half hour. The first, I'm going to bundle two questions that came in from Jackie Fatka with Farm Progress. First, she asked, do you feel this administration is too focused on enforcement and not enough on new trade agreements or expanding market access for the U.S. ag industry? What should the administration's focus be? Rejoining CPTPP or looking to do deals similar to what we did with Japan, or pick up where negotiations left off on new agreements with UK and Kenya? And then she follows up specifically for you, Darcy. She says, Darcy, for you, you helped negotiate the terms of CPTPP for agriculture. Why do you think this administration has not voiced support for rejoining that deal? I think generally, great question from Jackie, focusing on how do we expand exports generally? What should be the administration's strategy? Darcy?
Sure. I might ask actually Joe to talk a little bit about chime in first, and then maybe I can come in after and some of our producer folks. But you know, there's a balance between maintenance of markets and making sure that enforcement and rules are adhered to, but opening new ones as well. Maybe you can comment a little bit on the important role of trade from our current trading partners, but then also opportunities for new ones.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Darcy. I don't think these things are mutually exclusive at all, and I would hope that one way or the other that the Biden administration starts looking outward and starts looking for potential re-engagement in some of these areas. I think to the very specific question of whether or not it makes sense to negotiate bilaterally with Japan and other countries, or multilaterally with in these mega regionals, I think it's preferable to do the latter. I think we were very instrumental in sort of creating the architecture for what was TPP and now CPTPP. Thank you, Deb. I think it is hard to say, but I think it makes sense to re-engage in there at some point. I mean, I think it may take a little while for the administration to start doing that, but hopefully within the next year or so, we'll start seeing some move in that way. Otherwise, I think you risk really falling behind. And to do it individually, it just takes a lot of resources. And even something, I mean, you look at that ag agreement with the renegotiation of NAFTA, and the ag agreement isn't all that different than what was there before, and it still took over a year. So I think the idea of going around the country or around the world and negotiating a lot of different bilaterals at once, when we could go back to one mega regional and get back in there, I think the latter makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and I think to the question on CPTPP, you have a biased moderator here who, of course, spent a lot of time negotiating the ag package on TPP, and so thought that it was an important deal and a good one. But I think all we can do is take this administration on their word, right, as to what they think are positive elements and what they think might need work in order to re-engage in that agreement. And I think what you hear from them is that they feel it's a little bit outdated, particularly in the areas of labor and environment. And there's a strong emphasis on saying we can use trade as a force to influence other key priorities for how people participate in trade, and making sure that we don't have a race to the bottom in terms of the environment, that we can use our trade architecture to try and encourage better environmental practices globally. And we just finished a big discussion on labor. We also want to make sure that fair treatment of workers and fair practices in terms of trade not undermining markets for some of our workers here in the United States and for their products is an important element of trade agreements. And certainly the USMCA, Joe makes the good point that when it comes to agriculture, we really had removed almost all of the tariff type barriers to trade with Mexico and Canada through the USMCA. And so those terms of trade didn't really change. What did change in that agreement were the labor and environment standards, some rules of origin for products like automobiles, but also some standards on science-based decision-making for agriculture that really, I think this administration would like to see be more of a model for re-engagement in TPP. And so I think if this administration would choose to re-engage or choose to form some other sort of alignment of regional economies in Asia, we should expect labor and environment to be key priorities. The last comment I would make on what Joe had said is he used, I think, a really important term, which is that we had used TPP to really try and create a new architecture for trade, and that regional engagements involving ourselves and forming new opportunities to trade with groups of like-minded countries who not only are interested in opening markets, but creating the kind of transparency and high standards for trade that we have in the US and that we expect are an important part of thinking about the trade agenda going forward as well. And that's what we had with TPP and anything else. I think if we can really influence how trade flows and the kind of doing business atmosphere that we expect through those agreements, that's important as well. I think actually, if I can put you on the spot a little bit, AV, about trading partners and priorities, if you might want to address some of those questions too, about which markets would be important, what things the industry is focused on for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So CPTPP is very important to the pork producers. I mean, when we started losing Japan, and we got in there in the mini deal, that could have went backwards really fast. We were already starting to lose a foothold there in Japan. And when we got the smaller deal, we were starting to get back there. But countries like China and Taiwan and the UK are asking to get into the CPTPP, formally asked. And I heard about Korea is going to think about getting into these. these are huge markets for our pork, and we need to be there with our competitors. This, I understand, in the past wanting to do bilateral deals, but when these rules are getting formed in CPTPP, thanks to you and others about getting strong rules in place, but we need to be at the table as other countries come on. With pork and the EU, we have with agriculture, there are some issues there, and I'll leave it at that. But being at those tables and setting those rules are extremely important. You can start knocking off a lot of bilateral agreements if we get back into CPTPP.
Thank you. I think it's as a former negotiator, I will say that one of the things we talked about for the TPP was its potential to be sort of a magnet, as countries saw the benefit of being part of that grouping, seeing and being attracted to being part of that club, not only to get the tariff benefits, but also then saying we're willing to adopt some of these rules on labor, on environment, on intellectual property protection, because we see the magnetism of the deal. As you know, the magnet seems to be working a little bit, but we are not currently inside that grouping. But that RCEP, the regional deal among the ASEAN countries and China, I think there is some momentum behind regional approaches, and that's worth really watching for the US, given how dependent we are on trade and the broad range of products that we export. Brian, do you have another question for us? You're still on mute, Brian.
My goodness, I swore I wouldn't do that. We're going to group two questions together. First, from Chris Clayton with DTN, the Progressive Farmer. Chris asks, he says, you guys are all over the map, literally, in what you say, you would like to see from the Biden administration on ag trade. Can someone spell out what would be the quickest, most direct move to get the most bang for the buck? What would we like to see from the Biden administration? And then second, from Cabela Guzman asks, what are the best ways to move forward? Is it all up to the White House, or can farmers and ranchers do more? So I think those two questions pair pretty nicely. Darcy?
Well, I think those are some great questions. I'm not sure there's one sort of unanimous answer about, we did hear a little bit all over the map, but maybe we can do a little bit of a lightning round for each of your sectors. Maybe what is the most important market that you would like to see, or what is right now the biggest challenge you're facing in trade? Maybe we can ask that, and then go back a little bit to say how, and take that second question, which is what's the best way to move forward, but what role can all of us play in terms of helping to prioritize and influence that trade agenda? So that I'm gonna use my prerogative here and make this a little bit of a round robin. So why don't we start with you, Manny? What's the most important priority for you, or the most important impediment that you would like to see addressed? And we'll just go quickly through.
Of course, I hope you can hear me. Good, all right. Well, the first thing I would need is just to get rid of COVID. And I say that somewhat jokingly, but still, you get rid of COVID, we can get cruising back up to speed, and we can get consumption in and around the Caribbean back up to the levels that were before. Consequently, we can go back to normal. So for me, is the current state of affairs regarding COVID.
I think that's a really important point about how our trade agenda does not operate in isolation from other important imperatives like public health. And we've really seen that this year. So actually, excellent point, Manny. What about you, Doug?
Sorry about that. Well, for dairy, the most important market would definitely be Southeast Asia. And probably the most important factor right now is we feel we're falling behind a lot of our competitors in new trade agreements, and we have to do more to increase access for US ag and dairy in that marketplace.
Excellent. Deb, I'm going to go to you next. I'm going by the order you're on my screen, so I'm going to call you out.
For NCGA, we really, really believe in re-engaging with the Southeast Asia area. It's a top priority for us. We also believe in maintaining, nurturing, the markets we do have and expand in any way we can. We're also, I'm not sure, can't remember the gentleman with ethanol, but again, ethanol is a huge issue for us as well, that expansion of those markets. So I think I'm going to echo what a lot of people, or what Doug said, and I bet a lot of people may echo the same thing I'm saying, but that Southeast Asia region is huge for us.
Great. Fernando, what would you say is either the biggest priority or the biggest impediment you want to address?
Yes, absolutely. So being here in the Port of Long Beach, obviously getting our port a little bit more decongested would be a great thing and a great help to just the overall logistics. Logistics this upcoming season for us is the biggest hurdle to cross over. We're expecting it to be the hardest season yet as far as logistics. A lot of it has to do with COVID, as Manny has already mentioned. And as far as the most important market, I would say Southeast Asia or those Asian markets is where we've seen a decline in exports on grapes. And we would love, those are some of the highest paying markets. So it would be great to be able to increase that as well.
Excellent. Seeing a lot of emphasis on Asia there. Okay, AV, your turn. Then we'll have Joe go last.
Okay. Well, obviously the biggest one for MPPC would be getting back into the CPTPP. It would be huge for pork producers, and not only the countries that are already in it. I see this as probably the fastest growing in that Southeast Asia is different countries getting into the CPTPP, and MPPC and the United States needs to be in there to fight for right regulations being put on agriculture in these trade deals. Again, I bring up the EU and some of the, we barely send any pork to the EU for those kind of reasons. So getting into the CPTPP is number one. Some of the other ones now that we're working on, again, the Philippines, it'd be nice to have a long-term deal with them because, it's growing because they have ASF is growing by over almost 200% in the last seven months. Again, looking at Vietnam, getting in there. Again, they have broke with African swine fever, so that'd be a huge market getting into quickly. And then, working with the ports and stuff and keeping foreign animal diseases out of this country to help us keep our trade going. Those are the major issues.
You raise a very good issue there, and one that Manny mentioned earlier too, which is that our trade agreements, our trade relationships have a lot to do with expanding new markets, but also providing very important protections for human, animal, plant health, making sure that what we send is safe and of good quality, and protecting our people and our herds for that matter. Good and interesting point we may want to come back to. Joe, I think we've heard overwhelmingly that there's a lot of interest in that Southeast Asian region. And a concern over logistics right now. What would you say is, as a former both economist and policymaker and negotiator, would be your priorities or the top things that the administration should pay attention to or address for the trade agenda?
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think that I already talked about TPP, so let me treat another one that I think that probably isn't going to get a lot of, probably doesn't come to everyone's top of everyone's list, but I think it probably should at the end of the day, and that's the multilateral process at the WTO. And in particular, I think the immediate crisis, if you will, is trying to resolve this appellate body decision. The U.S. has taken a lot of cases against trading partners when they find that they don't, but we don't believe that those trading partners are acting according to the trade rules, and the WTO provides that forum. A great case in point are the two successful cases that were launched in 2016 against China on subsidies and on TRQ administration. I think we've seen good results from both those, although there's still issues on China's subsidies and on TRQ administration. But these are really important for them to get corrected currently right now, the system is essentially broken. There are panel reports being submitted to the WTO membership, but if a member decides to appeal that panel decision, it essentially goes into a void, and we need to get that. And the other big thing about multilateralism, where I think that forum is so important, is you think about emerging things like standards and environmental standards and other sorts of things. You can negotiate those things bilaterally, but unfortunately, what's starting to emerge are this real spaghetti bowl where you have the EU negotiating certain treaties that have implications for things like geographic indications or potentially longer term sustainability standards and that sort of thing. The US doing other sorts of things. And I think the WTO provides a place to try to get some standardization or equivalence or harmonization in a standards process. And I think that's going to be increasingly important for agricultural products. So.
That's an excellent point, Joe. I think I would echo that, that we're hearing two things. One is that, not falling behind and really being able to expand markets for US agriculture is important. What I've heard here is that doing so on a regional basis, not trying to pick off country by country. Unfortunately, we have a very participatory system when it comes to trade negotiation, which is important, but it also means it is not fast. And trade votes in Congress have never been easy, right? So if we try and tackle this market by market, it's difficult for us to maintain a pace that is anywhere near the pace that our trading partners and our competitors are really signing these new deals. But second is maintaining the markets is really important. And I think we focus a lot of times on new deals and how much of our trade is with free trade agreement partners. But US agriculture is shipping massive amounts of a variety of products to countries with whom we don't have a bilateral deal every day. And we're dependent on those countries following through with the commitments they made in the WTO. And so making sure that we are continuing to maintain those markets, to develop new ways to increase transparency, all those things you can do through the multilateral system is really important. But I don't want to lose the last part of that question, and I'm going to just take it a little bit here, but want others to chime in as well on what agriculture can do. Do you just leave it to the White House, or is there another way to work forward? All of you are forming part of the What Can You Do function right now by participating in the panel. The panelists are working with your trade associations, et cetera, and really, Joe as well has done some really excellent work on the value of exports and markets and the sort of economic dynamics we're seeing out there to really, again, do what I had said at the beginning of this, kind of connect the dots for the importance of that trade agenda for US agriculture. And some of you have called out specific markets, for example, that would be priorities and be particularly important for your product or industry going forward. All of that data, that advice, the understanding you can bring about specific products in specific markets, working closely with the Foreign Ag Service and our ag attaches overseas to talk about what is working well, what could be working better in the regulations or the practices of our trading partners. Are these markets open? Are they becoming increasingly more difficult through application of standards or certification procedures, other things? Your advocacy, your data, you providing the context of what particular policies mean down at the level of your farms and constituencies, and making that known to the administrator or to the administration and to your congressional representatives is an important part of creating the momentum for trade. And so would encourage all of you to keep doing what you're doing, and others on the phone today as well. Are there other panelists who want to comment on that and on kind of what you're doing in ways that you're engaging, or should we head to the next question? All right, I'm not seeing a raised hand, so I'm turning it to you, Brian.
Great. I'm going to couple up a couple questions because we're not going to be able to get to all the questions, unfortunately, but two that pair nicely. One is from Ashley Davenport with Michigan Ag Today. She asks, With all these port issues, particularly on the West Coast, what kind of message does that send to our trading partners? And then Alicia Rockwell with Blue Diamond. Alicia, great to have you dialed in today. Alicia asks, do you think the U.S. is at a long-term disadvantage not operating our own shipping line, given the ongoing demand for global trade and our reliance upon it? I think two good questions, just asking about the snarl in supply chains and what we need to do to be able to continue to export and in some cases import. Darcy, I'll hand it to you.
Great. Well, I think our natural at answering this a little bit on some of the pressures that you're facing, perhaps Manny, you could address that a little bit. Do you see frustration from trading partners, from other shippers about the congestion at our ports? Is it particularly unique, given that this is a global problem as well?
Well, I think we must keep in mind that we have become a global market. It's just not only the United States or another literally by trade agreement. In other words, we're trading with everybody. It is unfortunate that Long Beach and LA is facing the congestion that they are. And by the way, that's starting to spill over to the East Coast. Savannah, the port of Savannah, has had, last we heard, it's about 23 or 26 ships waiting outside to come in. South Florida, fortunately, we're not affected by it. In fact, right now, my port, we can accommodate, several ships. Unfortunately, not the size of the ships that you see. We are a much smaller niche type of port. I can see how our trading partners may be frustrated. Keep in mind too that most of our, if I understand this correctly, most of our agricultural products that we are shipping out is primarily in bulk carriers. What we're seeing in Long Beach and what we're seeing in Los Angeles, these are container carriers. I don't believe that we're putting a lot of agricultural products inside containers, although that is possible. Refrigerated containers is a daily occurrence, particularly here when you move meat and fresh eggs and things of that nature. Yes, you could put it inside a refrigerated container. And in our case, in South Florida, in hours, it could be in a foreign port. I don't recall the first question, but I hope that my question was broad enough that it covered it, but I'm not sure. I'll leave it, I'll throw it right back at you, Darcy.
I think that's very helpful, Manny, and you're right that we see a lot of the coverage and frustration on what's happening on the West. It may not be a universal experience for our ports on the East. And good to keep in mind that the congestion we're seeing may vary by the type of cargo as well. Fernando, maybe you can talk since you're both importing and exporting, and you're dealing with a highly perishable product, the efficiency of shipping is really important to you. What are you hearing from our customers, our trading partners, and from the grape growers that you work with about the shipping issue and how that might reflect on our business overall?
Absolutely. There is concern. There is most definitely concern, especially on the West Coast. And to Manny's point, out of Peru, for example, 100% of the grapes coming into the US come in container boats. So there is a couple of different options we have other than the Port of LA. So diverting it to a smaller port, but that can handle containers such as the Port of Hueneme is currently a very solid option. Looking at options such as Houston as well, trying to divert as much cargo to the different ports so that it's not all focused on LA and Long Beach. There's also different applications and products that help extend the shelf life of table grapes, for example, and or other produce that help maintain better or the post-harvest life of the fruit. So those two things in conjunction, finding different ports to get the fruit here quicker and adding different products to help maintain the quality and condition of the fruit, help retailers be a little bit more confident that yes, the fruit is going to take a little longer to get here, but it's going to come. And for the other side, on the grower side on South America, they see this as it could be potentially a very good market, given all these delays and the demand that we're going to have for it. There is certainly interest in continuing to send fruit to the US. We are expecting probably a little bit less product coming to the US, just given all the congestions and the current supply chain situation. But we're here to stay. We do this year in and year out, and we're gonna be maybe not hitting a record number this year, but we will still be actively importing and making sure we have grapes on the shelf 365 days a year.
Doug, did you want to weigh in a little bit about on the port situation and perhaps what signals that's sending to our trading partners?
Well, dairy primarily uses the west side for its exports to Asia. And I think for dairy, I mean, we look at it as our competitors are actually not having these same port issues. So it does make the US look a little more unreliable if New Zealand and the EU can deliver more prompt and unload and load. And yeah, I just say that the ports do make us look like an unreliable supplier at this time, or it could be, that could definitely be drawn, I guess.
Yeah, I think this is, I, like many people, have been watching this and reading, and the confluence of events with, different opening and closing and restarting of economies and the global supply chain, shortages of trucks, different paces of manufacturing and consumption, and just the extent to which other countries want to access our market and that we are demanding these goods. There is no, I think, magic button to sort of clear that backlog, because there are so many different elements of those logistics, from production through the changes in how we're consuming, in many cases more online than we have been before, that is sort of compounding this problem and will take a little bit to unwind. I would just add, to Doug's point, there may be easier places to get some of our products that we export right now, particularly for those who are more co-located or in the regions of some of our customers. But I think that it highlights a bit the importance of what you are all doing on the panel, which is talking about the importance of trade to agriculture, the resilience of ag trade, and of your intention to stay fully engaged as reliable and high quality suppliers. I think sometimes we have to state what we think is obvious in our outreach to our customers to get us through some of these times. I note that we're about to hit time here. And so just wanted to hit a couple of threads here. I think we've seen how our ports, our importers, exporters, our logistics, the different, whether it's pork or grain or beef or dairy or ethanol, that really all of these products are dependent on trade and are spurring other economic activity throughout the US supply chain. But we also really heard a desire to be playing more offense on trade. And I wonder, actually, Joe, if I could put you on the spot just a little bit here, is what I hear in all of this is a US ag sector that really wants to be globally engaged, is concerned about how it is serving its own customers and its employees, but really that its ability to be economically more competitive, to be more supportive of its workforce, is directly linked to its access to markets, and that we can't increase our economic activity and economic situation, our competitiveness at home, without the certainty and stability that consistent access to foreign markets and those growth opportunities provides, and how important that certainty of foreign markets is to the farmer income and the income for our processors and others that we rely on. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the way that trade reduces volatility and really helps in forward planning and growth of those businesses across U.S. agriculture.
Yeah, sure. And I those are both really good points. And I think there's no question. And again, I mentioned just some of the percents of production that were exported, and you can just see how significant it is. And that means when you have a large crop, you can, again, first of all, food consumption doesn't change much with income. So we tend to eat, we have dietary trends that are ongoing in the US, be it, trends on dairy or sugar or fruits and vegetables or whatever. But as the comment has been made by several people about most of that growth being outside of the US, and I think that has to continue, to keep pace with productivity gains and other things. And with that comes challenges, because I do think we are looking at, I noted one of the questions on things like environmental standards and other things. It is becoming an increasingly important to respond to consumers, be they in Europe or wherever. And so, trying to, agriculture has to adjust to that to remain competitive. And, for the longest time, one of the big competitive factors that we had was just a seamless transportation system. So you could, put something aboard some, a container, harvest it, get it on board a ship, ship it somewhere, and lower the costs. And that's one of the reasons we've been able to keep pace with South America and other potential suppliers. I think this is a temporary situation, hopefully, that we're looking at with COVID, and that we can look beyond that. And I think the real danger, and this harkens back to an earlier question, is should we create a new transportation system or whatever? I mean, I think we have to develop flexibility, certainly, but I think the last thing you'd want to do is subsidize anything or get something that, because at the end of the day, agricultural suppliers are going to want to find the cheapest way to get that product and reliable way to get it to various places. So we don't want to create something where when COVID's over, everyone says, gee, why do we have this really expensive system? We need to, get back to things. So I think the system has shown amazing flexibility. And I think, you've heard from some of the people here, like the ports and other things, that have worked really hard to keep that system going. But trade, incredibly important, and will be increasingly important.
Thank you for that, Joe. I think, for me, what I heard as this administration, came into office in Ambassador Ty's confirmation hearing, she talked a lot about the need to walk and chew gum at the same time. That is, to make sure and focus on infrastructure and competitiveness of U.S. industry, but understanding as well that we have sectors like agriculture that are very much export dependent. And I think we've heard that loud and clear on this panel today, that for agriculture to thrive and to be co-investors with our government in strengthening the environmental resilience, the worker protections, et cetera, for U.S. agriculture, we also need to be expanding markets as well. So that walking and chewing gum at the same time is a real priority for U.S. agriculture. But I also hear in this panel a group of individuals who are ready to sort of help plot what that walking and chewing gum looks like, and to work forward and really strengthen the U.S. agriculture's role in international trade. So on that note, I think we will wrap, but I will say that those of you who did not have the opportunity to get your questions answered today, if you can reach out to Matt at farmersforfreetrade.com. That email address, again, Matt, M-A-T-T, at farmersforfreetrade.com. He can perhaps connect you to panelists, to reporters for some further discussion there if you'd like. So thanks to all of you, and thanks to Farmers for Free Trade for sponsoring this, to all of you for listening, and particularly to the panelists for providing your insights today. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope all of you did too. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. Great discussion. Very much appreciated.
Thank you all.